Okay, first of all, thanks to everyone for actually coming back from the break to listen to a topic that's a little bit different than the rest of the conference, but hopefully I can keep everybody interested. I have attended many 3D technology and 3D printing conferences over the last 4 years, had the opportunity to speak at a few. I can always count on my wife to keep me grounded. I came back from the first one, I was unpacking, she said, "How'd it go?" And I jokingly said, "Oh, it went great. I had them on the edge of their seat the entire time." And she looked at me with a straight face and goes, "That's probably because they were trying to get up the courage to leave." So hopefully I can prevent that from happening here. What I'm going to talk about today is basically three things. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Trent Capital and how a small investment firm based in Greensboro, North Carolina, got involved in 3D printing. I'm going to talk about some of the recent headlines and performance of some of the 3D printing stocks and why that's a little bit misleading. And then I'm going to talk about some of the specific companies and specific opportunities within the 3D printing industry to invest. Go ahead and get started here with just a brief background about Trent Capital. We were formed in 1987 as a fee-only registered investment advisor. We really have two main products that we do. We manage customized portfolios for individuals, mainly high net worth individuals, where we're building portfolios based on their age, income needs, risk tolerance, investment time horizon, that kind of thing. We also manage 401k plans for small to mid-sized companies where we are writing the investment policy statement, selecting the mutual funds for the employees to choose from, and monitoring those funds and swapping them out if they're the performance slips. But it's that last bullet point that I really want to focus on, the specialty private placements, because that's actually how Trent Capital, before I got involved, I joined in 1995, but before I started, that's actually how Trent Capital got its start, investing in what at the time was a up-and-coming technology that not a lot of people had heard about, and that was cellular communications. Back when cell phones looked a lot like that, this particular model cost $3,200. And we know how far that industry has come since that time and the advancements that we've had in that industry. If you back up about 4 years, late 2012, early 2013, we started to see a lot of similarities in the 3D printing industry and the cellular industry back when we first got started in 1987. A few of those are lack of awareness. Right now, in 2017, I think most people have heard of 3D printing, they're aware of it. 4 years ago, that was not the case. We even had a prospective client that we were talking to who said, "Now, do I have to wear those funny glasses with that?" Another similarity in the industries was, high initial cost and steeply declining cost. I mean, we see, now you can get a cell phone for basically free, a couple $100. We're also seeing that same trend in 3D printing with the 3D printing technology, steeply declining cost. And then also exponential growth in commercial and consumer applications. More and more and more things that you can do in the 3D printing industry. So in mid-2013, July of 2013 to be specific, we launched 3D Tech Plus. 3D Tech Plus is a private fund structured as an LLC. It is for accredited investors only. It is regulated by the SEC, and it does go through an annual audit by a PCAOB certified accounting firm. That's a little bit about Trent Capital and kind of how we got involved in the industry. Now to talk a little bit about the performance of 3D printing and some of the stocks and what's been going on in the industry. This is the Gartner Hype Cycle graph right here. It's a very busy graph. I'm going to just briefly explain. This section right here is when a technology is becoming popular, kind of, I guess, in the mainstream media. The applications are being talked about a lot more. This would be the time where, in 2013, President Obama mentioned 3D printing at the State of the Union address. This would be about the time where the 3D printed gun was in the news that caused the media to really jump on that story. This is about the time where, if you look right here, you'll see 3D printed bioprinting right down at the bottom of the technology trigger. That would be about the time where people started talking about how soon, in quotes, that we'll have 3D printed organs that we can transplant into patients. And you'll see right at the top here, we started our fund in 2013, by the way. Right at the top there, you see 3D printing. At the top of the peak of inflated expectations. And some of the things I just mentioned caused those inflated expectations, as did articles like this one. This is from Investors Business Daily. 3D printer in your house might be the next big thing. And the article really kind of focused on everyone having a 3D printer in their home and being able to print a wide variety of things. That graph really shows the technology. You got the peak of inflated expectations, then as you realize that those expectations aren't going to come to pass and what you think will be done and what really can happen as far as practical applications, they don't necessarily meet, then you come down through the trough of disillusionment. And that's what happened in 2014 and 2015. As you see some of these headlines here, there is a 3D printing index, much like the S&P 500. It's down 70% since January 1st, 2014. I've actually got the Barron's here, beware of 3D printing. So the industry really was going through a tough time as far as investments in stock prices. And I'll go back to this graph because while that's talking about the specific technology, you can almost overlay the stock prices over that graph as well. You had 2012 and 2013, they went straight up, and then 2014 and 15, they came down the trough of disillusionment. As you can see here, down 70%. Let's fast forward just a little bit. I wanted to go over one of these other graphs here because it's kind of interesting. You'll see that the bioprinting is still here, still in those initial phases. They did separate consumer 3D printing and enterprise 3D printing there. If you look at the red arrows on that graph, I think that's a very important distinction that in 2013, a lot of people didn't have that distinction. And in fact, they didn't even separate it out on their own graph here. But what has happened in those two industries are far, far different. In fact, one of the reasons our fund has performed so much better than the index is our focus has always been on the industrial and commercial side, the metal side, and we largely ignored the consumer side of 3D printing. A lot of people, when they're investing in this industry, they just look at the people that make the 3D printers, the ones that you Google, you see 4 or 5 names. And that's really what I talk about when I was saying that the headlines were a little bit misleading. There are a lot of sectors in the 3D printing industry that have performed fairly well. We want to keep a diversified fund. We have obviously some of the printer manufacturers, but scanners is a very important part of 3D printing. It's a good area to invest in. Potentially, CAD/CAM simulation software, materials, all of those bullet points up there are opportunities to invest in the sector that aren't necessarily the pure play 3D systems and X1s and Stratasys and things like that. I want to point out a few of the individual stocks because these 4 and one more are what led to the decline in the industry and some of those misleading headlines about the decline in the industry and the decline in the stock prices. And basically what I've got here, each of those stocks, I've got the current price. I have a 2-year, not a 52-week, but a 2-year high and a low. I have the all-time high and then the date that it hit its all-time high. So for example, 3D Systems there is trading at about $15. Over the last 2 years, it's traded between $6 and $31. Its all-time high was 96. And once again, if you go back to that hype cycle graph, all of these hit their high in 2013 at that peak of inflated expectations. And you can see basically every single one of these stocks here is down 85 to 90% from its all-time high. So they've come way down. But that doesn't tell the full story. There are other investments, even other manufacturers of printers that have fared much better. Arcam is one, they're focused, they just got bought out by GE. About 6 months ago, or 75% of their stock actually got bought out by GE. That's trading right near its 52-week high. They're a metal printer. They print metal mainly for the aerospace industry. SLM Solutions is once again right there trading pretty close to its 2-year high and its all-time high. I'm going to skip down to Renishaw. Renishaw does a lot within the medical field, and they're trading right at their all-time high. So not all is as bad as the prior slide would make it seem. I do throw Hewlett-Packard in there simply because they are a new entrant into the 3D printing industry. The experts seem to think that their product is a real game changer. The problem with Hewlett-Packard, in my opinion, is that 3D printing will never become a substantial portion of their overall revenues. I mean, they're a $48 to $50 billion annual revenue company. I mentioned Renishaw being involved in medical 3D printing. There's a guy right there, his name's Stephen Power, that was involved in a pretty traumatic motorcycle accident. Renishaw printed the custom jigs and surgical guides for his procedure. He had cranial as well as facial surgery, and Renishaw was very active and involved in that process. Some other areas that I'm going to go through real quick because I want to spend some time on the medical side. I mentioned CAD/CAM software. There's 4 players right there. I also should have SAP on there. They're a large player in the 3D printing industry. For somebody looking to invest in the 3D printing sector, these are good investments. Autodesk makes a software. It's an open source software called Spark, and they also make a 3D printer that works in conjunction with that software called Ember. And so they're a kind of a vertically integrated CAD/CAM software company. Simulation software, there are a couple players that are publicly traded you can buy. Exacorp is mainly in the automotive industry. They make flow simulation software. Ansys makes engineering simulation software for a variety of industries: aerospace, healthcare, automotive. Scanners, extremely important part of the 3D printing process. There's just a few of the names there, and you can see you've got everything from Nikon, which is a huge company. Obviously, they're diversified across a lot of other things other than scanners, down to a small, very small company called Perceptron with just a $50 million market cap. They're solely focused on just scanners. Protolabs. Protolabs is a kind of a hybrid. It's a very interesting company. They are I guess a subcontractor. A lot of the Fortune 500 companies that do parts and prototypes will hire Protolabs to do a lot of the work for them. And I call them a hybrid because they truly are. I mean, they do traditional manufacturing processes, such as molding and CNC, but they also use 3D printing to manufacture those parts as well, where it might be applicable and where the 3D printing might be the better technology. Medical, and this is where I do want to get into some of the, this is why we're here. This is a medical conference, so I want to spend a little bit more time, but most of the advancements have clearly been in the medical industry, as we've heard so far today, and we'll hear, over the next day and a half about the many advancements. But I just bullet point a few of those. Some of them have already been talked about here today. The virtual pre-surgery planning is becoming a really big deal, printing the models to rehearse complicated surgeries, to pre-plan surgeries. It was interesting when I was putting this presentation together about a month ago or so. I put this picture up here of a relatively famous case called the McDonald twins. Some of the people in the room may have heard about that. And I was reading up on it to become a little bit more knowledgeable so I could talk about it. And 2 weeks ago, I was at the Inside 3D Printing Conference in New York, and one of the lead surgeons there, Dr. Orrin Tepper, was there, and he did a 30-minute presentation on that particular surgery. It was a 27-hour surgery to separate those two boys right there, the conjoined twins. And one of the things he stressed was that the amount of 3D models and 3D modeling and pre-surgery planning that went into the process, as well as during the surgery. They actually stopped during the surgery because there was entanglement of some blood vessels, and they weren't sure where to make the next cut, so they actually stopped the surgery and referred to some of the 3D printed models. And he really stressed that without those models, and maybe 10 or 15 years ago, before they were able to practice the surgery and rehearse the surgery on those models, the outcome for those two boys would have been probably far different than it ended up being. They are home now. CNN, they're doing a documentary about the surgery that's going to be on CNN. They were there in the operating room during the surgery. So a great example of that virtual pre-surgery planning and being able to get patient input along the way. Bioprinting is another area where there's obviously been some advancements, but there's also a lot of limitations. We heard our prior speaker talk about both, what's going on in that industry. 3D printed custom guides and jigs and tools, that's a big area of 3D printing, as you'll see as I go through some of these companies. Prosthetics is a neat area. That's an area that's taken down the cost of prosthetics from $10,000 to $20,000 down to literally hundreds of dollars, which is extremely important when you have a young child who may need a prosthetic arm or leg and they're growing rapidly. It makes it a whole lot cheaper to replace that device. And then braces, specifically really scoliosis braces. I heard at one of the conferences I went to, heard a very interesting presentation from the head of 3D Systems Healthcare Unit talking about what they were finding was that especially in teenage girls that had scoliosis. They weren't getting better because they weren't wearing their braces, because they were ugly, they were bulky, they were getting made fun of in school and things like that. And as the daughter of a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old daughters, I can certainly vouch for the fact that if something is ugly and bulky, they're not going to wear it. Mine will hardly leave the house if a hair is out of place. But by making more fashionable, better fitting 3D printed braces, what they're finding now is that these teenage girls actually want to wear their braces. They want to wear them to school because they're conversation pieces. They can match them to their outfits and things like that. So just a lot of different advancements in the medical field. But where are the investment opportunities? I'll go through a few of them. Align Technology is probably the most famous one. A lot of people that are involved in 3D printing world have heard about this one, so I'm not going to go to a lot of detail, but they make the Invisalign braces, so to speak. They're technically aligners, but I'm just going to call them braces because that's what everybody else calls them. I think this is an interesting company because it's always just kind of been ingrained in us that we've got mass production on one side and customization on the other, and never shall the two meet. And this is a clear case where by using 3D printing technology, the two definitely meet. I mean, 17 million, I don't think anybody would argue that that's pretty mass production, but every single one of them is customized to the patient's mouth, to the patient's bite, teeth, bone structure in their mouth, etc. So that's a very interesting case. They have a factory, and these are 2015 numbers. I don't have the 2016 numbers yet. 65 3D printers making 17 million of those in a year. Conformis is an interesting company. They make custom knee replacements. 700,000 people a year have knee replacement surgery. 1 in 5 are unhappy with the results. And what Conformis does basically is they take a CT scan of the deteriorating knee and 3D print a custom knee for that particular patient, based on their exact body type. And we're definitely heading toward customized medicine. I think the days of picking a knee replacement or a hip replacement just off the shelf from a various sizes like you would a small or medium shirt at Kohl's, are probably days that are going to be behind us pretty soon. Conformis is an interesting company as well. Organovo, we talked about bioprinting. I did throw the Organovo stock information up there because that's the 5th company that has led that sharp decline, that 70% decline in the industry. That's one of those companies. You can see it's trading about $3 right now, about half of where it was traded over the last 2 years, and down about 70% from its all-time high, once again, from 2013. But they have the 3D printed liver tissue that the drug companies, that some of the large pharmaceutical companies are testing drugs on, and then they recently released their second commercial product, which is the kidney tissue. Arconic is an interesting company. It's actually a new company. It's a spinoff from Alcoa. And Arconic, they just built a new $60 million facility in Pittsburgh. They basically make the powders. They make the powder, they make the cobalt powder, the titanium, the nickel, the aluminum that go into making the products that the finished product is metal. Most of what they do right now is involved in the aerospace industry, but they also are getting involved in the healthcare industry as well. Anything that might need the powder to produce those finished materials that are aluminum, titanium, and cobalt, they would be involved in that process. One of the more interesting companies to me out of all the ones that I have gone over is Materialize. Materialize is a service company as well. They are one of the only pure play 3D printing companies that does not actually manufacture the printer. They really do 3 things. They software and services side. Their software is very interesting. It's the only agnostic software that I'm aware of in the industry, meaning that a service bureau or an operator of a fleet of 3D printers by multiple manufacturers can operate that fleet with a single software from a single source. Medical, they do a lot of things in medical. They work with doctors to help pre-plan surgery, rehearse complicated surgeries, and print those patient-specific devices that I talked about earlier, some of those jigs and things like that. They also do industrial production. They have a service bureau of printers of 130 printers that spit out 2,000 parts a day. So it's a really interesting company. One I did not do a slide for because I knew that they would be here today, both as a sponsor and a presenter, that is publicly traded, is EOS Imaging. EOS is one of the large holdings in our fund, so I was really excited to see that they were here and be able to listen to their presentation both today and tomorrow about their technology. So, once again, there's a lot of investment opportunities in the 3D printing industry if you know where to look. If you just Google it, you're going to see those 4 or 5 stocks that are down 60, 70%, because that's what the popular, the press, the Forbes and the Barron's of the world, that's what they want to talk about. But 3D printing is really, it's changing manufacturing in a lot of ways. The traditional manufacturing model is kind of in certain industries being turned upside down. There are certain industries, like where my dad used to work at Tyco Electronics, that won't be touched by 3D printing. He was spitting out 10,000, 20,000 dies in 10 minutes, just boom, boom, boom. We won't touch that. There are certain industries like the hearing aids, certainly like the Invisalign braces, and we'll say in a few years possibly a company like Conformis with those knee replacements, where it's really changing the manufacturing model. But I think mainly what's going to happen with 3D printing is it's going to be complementary. It's going to be a complementary technology that for parts and prototypes and industries where it's a good fit, it will play a complementary role, much like it does with Boeing. The Boeing Dreamliner has 20,000 3D printed parts. They probably have just as many parts, if not more, that are not 3D printing. So it'll definitely play a complementary role. So those aren't all the investment opportunities, but those are a whole lot of them across a wide variety of industries. And at this point, I will see if anybody has any questions. Yes, ma'am.
As 3D printing moves from prototyping toward actual additive manufacturing, what kinds of predictions do you have for the advent of security and supply chain measures to make sure that the thing that gets produced is genuine?
That's a good question, because especially in the aerospace industry, where you've got massive regulation and parts that are being 3D printing where there's not necessarily guidelines for, that's an area where there's going to be a slower adoption than one might think. And I think what we've seen in a lot of cases with the consumer market is exactly what you're talking about, where there's just slow adoption. From an investment standpoint, I think your question should lead you to those industrial and commercial-based companies and avoiding the consumer-based companies. Okay, thank you.
All right.